Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. This is a chart for the Aries full moon that's happening on April 12th at 8:22 Eastern Daylight Time. Venus is going to turn direct about 45 minutes later, and the moon itself is in Libra, which is ruled by Venus. So there's going to be a lot of Venus energy, I would say, that we need to be, or that we'll be thinking about. Venus naturally rules Taurus, which is really about self-relationship, and it also rules Libra, which is about our relationship with others. And what I see in this chart is what I've been seeing generally, which is this idea of we need to figure out who we are. Pluto, what you might call the anchor of the chart as representative of the soul, is in Aquarius, which is about individuation and independence. Becoming individuated and independent so that we can then come together not in codependent relationships but in interdependent relationships. And we have to go through a development of a process of development and maturation to be able to do that. So the chart, the energy is suggesting that humanity as a general rule has reached a level where we can do that. But it may be that each of us individually still has some development to do because of various wounds and traumas, perhaps that are even held in our soul, that are coming up for us to kind of revisit and sort of heal and integrate. So, and by the way, I just want to make a point. I re-listened to an interview that I did with Erin Reese. She interviewed me, and at the beginning of that interview, I was sort of revisiting evolutionary astrology, and I was kind of calling myself an evolutionary astrologer. And I need to clarify that. That's actually not true. I did study kind of intensely for a relatively short period evolutionary astrology, and it has massively influenced me. But I never got certified, and I'd say it doesn't really... I couldn't really call myself an evolutionary astrologer or a spokesperson for the kind of evolutionary astrology that I learned, because I didn't actually go through the certification process. But it did influence me deeply, and I'm always thinking about it, so I talk about it all the time. But I would also say that I'm evolving my relationship with the chart into more of a developmental, kind of working out a developmental approach to astrology that's more human-centric. Because I think our human path is our spiritual path on Earth, and I think we've tended to bypass that and try to look beyond that to what's beyond that, and we sort of see this as an unfortunate thing we have to go through. We see our human experiences as an unfortunate thing we have to go through, or as a momentary diversion or pleasure or whatever, or misery or whatever, that will then end, and we'll get back to what we're supposed to be. But I think it maybe is more constructive, and I have a lot of Earth in my chart and a lot of Capricorn, so constructive, speaks to my heart. If we think about human development as our spiritual path of unfolding, then that brings human back into the equation. And I think human is important in the whole the whole sort of orchestra, the whole harmony of the spheres. We're one part of that, and the more that we can enter into that while we're here, the more we can contribute to that sort of symphony going on that I think we're meant to be a part of. So that's something. So I just wanted to make those kind of clarifications. So looking at this chart again, so we have the moon at 23 degrees of Libra, and opposite is the sun at 23 degrees of Aries. That's the full moon. The Sabian symbol for the moon is a butterfly with a third wing on the left side. I think it's very close to that, if that's not exactly it. I got that from James Burgess's site. I'm going to try not to be circling my arrow all the time. I'm sure that's very annoying to people who watch this. Anyway, I'll try to stop that. What comes to me when I think of a butterfly with a third wing, and this is just my own thoughts on this. I did read through what James Burgess said. I don't recall exactly what he was saying. I also looked at Linda Hill's version at Sabian Symbols. Her website is Sabian Symbols, but I don't recall exactly what she was saying, so I may be saying partly what they were saying. But what comes through for me is the idea that who am I? That is the question that Aries asks, who am I? The moon is opposite of Libra. Sorry, I'm going to back up a little bit. But if we look at this chart, we see there are a couple of kite patterns, or not kite patterns, but arrow patterns in a way. So we have this T-square pointing to Mars, which is the ruler of Aries, and it's in Cancer. And you can see this opposition going to Pluto, and it sort of makes this archer's arrow kind of thing in the chart. And going in the opposite way, if we include Sedna and we use somewhat wide orbs, wider orbs, we have a grand trine, which has been in effect for quite some time. And this opposition points, intersects with the grand trine at Pluto. So we see there's this other kind of arrow with this grand trine and this line pointing towards Pluto. So we get Pluto, which in evolutionary astrology is the soul, and it's an Aquarius. Aquarius is a fixed sign. The soul, we could say, is our base, our foundation, and a fixed sign, it's like our anchor. It's fixed. That's our anchor as we go through this time. And it's going to be there for, I think, 20 years? It might be 40 years. I can't remember. I'd have to look. And then we have Mars on the other side of this as the sort of like the release point, you could say, at least from the perspective of the T-square. And this is in Cancer. Mars, I am. Cancer, our family, our history, our lineage, and our ego identity. Our ego identity is forged in the circle of our family and our heritage. In the question, we have the moon in Libra, that's balance and imbalance. The question, and also beauty and harmony. The question we have to ask ourselves, I think, in this time is, are we who we are, our individuated, authentic selves, Aquarius, soul level, or have we become the expectations that others have asked of us? Have we become has our ego identity have been so forged within the construct of our families that we've lost touch with who we are? There's a lot going on in Pisces. And so the North Node in particular, that can be lost, but it can also be clarity. So have we gotten lost? Have we lost touch with ourselves because the expectations of our families were so penetrating. Penetrating would be a good word with Pluto and Mars. We diverted ourselves. We forged ourselves into this identity that people wanted us to be, and we've lost touch with our authentic selves. And I think that's the question. So a butterfly, the Sabian symbol, for 23 degrees Aries from James Burgess's site, is a butterfly with a third wing on its left side. Left is rational, reasoning brain. Right is intuitive brain. So have we constructed ourselves rationally in a way based on these ideas that we've inherited about who we're supposed to be versus who are we really? Until we figure out who are we really, we can't really enter into those interdependent relationships. At least that's the way I think. And I think it's when we enter into those interdependent relationships, when we reach that level of development that we can do that, that we have the potential to realize our highest potential as a human collective, Aquarius, our human collective. So I think that's what the energy of this chart is about, and that's really what I have to say about it. The interesting thing about this grand trine, if we include Sedna, the story of Sedna is really about this idea. It's about the expectation. She is probably an adolescent child, and the father wants to marry her off. I think she doesn't really want to do it, but he has all these suitors come, and she's like, no. And then this one mysterious guy comes, he doesn't show his face, and she says yes to this guy. He takes her to an island. He reveals himself. It turns out he's some kind of raven or some kind of bird that's specific to the culture that this story comes from. It's an Inuit. I think it's an Inuit story. And then there's different versions of the story, I guess, but the father eventually comes, realizes she's in distress, and comes and takes her away. And he comes in a boat, and as they're on the boat, the raven or whatever kind of bird it is comes and follows him, flaps its wings, creates this big disturbance, this big storm in the sea, and they're going to capsize. So the father throws his daughter into the ocean, and she tries to hang on to the boat. Right? She's all she's got is her fingers, and her father is chopping off each of her fingers. So eventually he chops off all her fingers. She can't hold on anymore, and she falls into the sea. She sinks into the sea and drowns. But she becomes the goddess of the sea. All of her fingers, each of her fingers becomes one of the different creatures of the ocean. So she kind of becomes the goddess of the sea and the creatures. So you could read that story potentially in one way. I am not an expert in mythology, but one thing that comes to mind to me, given what I'm talking about, is this idea that when we hold on to the past, there was something in her that was drawing her into to some other identity. And apparently she resisted that in some way, and the father sort of was complicit in that. And then But the call at a deeper level was to become her own person. So the question for me in that story is, was that raven or whatever kind of bird that was sort of calling her to her true authentic self? And was there this interplay of resistance? But the call was bigger, and so the raven representing that call creates a storm, and there's nothing else. She's going to become, sorry about the truck. She's going to become this individuated being, who she really is, the extraordinary creative force that she is. So that's one way to read the story. Again, I'm not an expert. If you want to find out more about that story, you can find it online and listen. There are people who tell that story much better than I do, and with greater depth and understanding about the mythology. But so when you include Sedna, that's an interesting story that comes into play when we look at the other energies of this chart. So I think that's it. And by the way, another interesting thing about this grand trine is that Sedna, Uranus falls outside of orb, so it's not really included in this grand trine. It has been, but it is conjunct. It's within orb of a conjunction to Sedna. So we could say that Uranus is present in this grand trine by default in a way. And Uranus rules Aquarius, which rules Pluto. And so we could say in a way, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's really it. You can stop listening right now. That's really the energy of this chart that I have to pass on. The rest will be just sort of looking at some of the details of this chart. So this is, you can see here, I've had different versions of this chart template that I've been using. I've been creating different themes. This is the latest one. I actually really like it. It's my favorite of all the ones I've created. And I'm creating as an aside, I'm creating a design system, and hopefully what that will do, my plan is for that to lead to creating an astrology software program that can spit out these kinds of charts. That'll involve me learning Python, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, over here we have statistics with I call them stat wheels. We have this stat wheel is showing the cardinal signs, this is showing the fixed signs, this is showing the mutable signs. So how this works is, this is the first quadrant, and this is the first quadrant, cardinal signs in the first quadrant, or a cardinal sign. So each quadrant has a cardinal sign, a fixed sign, and a mutable sign. So we have Aries, that shows how many are in Aries. But I'm only using the traditional planets. I'm only counting up the traditional planets. In previous charts that I've shown, I've just counted up all the objects. I'm doing it differently here. So there's one traditional planet, the Sun, in Cardinal, in Aries. And then we go to Cancer, that's over here. There's one traditional planet in Cardinal. Sorry, I'll try not to do the circling. That's Mars, that's here. There's one moon in Libra, in the third quadrant, that's here, and there's none in the fourth quadrant. So that's how that works. And then here you can see fixed, there's nothing. So the fixed sign in Taurus, in the first quadrant is Taurus, there's nothing there. There is Uranus, but there's no traditional planet. In Leo, there's nothing. In Scorpio, so Leo would be here, Scorpio would be here, And Aquarius would be here. There's one in Aquarius, but it's not a traditional planet, so I didn't include it. And then the mutable is the same. So that's Gemini over here. There's one. Jupiter is a traditional planet. Sedna is not. Here we have Virgo. There's the South Node is there, but it's not a traditional planet. And so Virgo would be here. Sagittarius is here. And then we have Pisces, and there's quite a bit here. There's Venus, Saturn, and Mercury in Pisces. So that's what's showing over here. Here are the dignities. So how I'm doing this, there are, in this version, I'm actually going to do this differently in future versions, but there are 5 essential dignities in traditional astrology and 2 debilities, but I was using these quad wheels and tri wheels, so I just did 4 dignities, and then I lumped the decans into a debility, but it isn't a debility. So the traditional astrology essential dignities are domicile or rulership, exaltation, triplicity, terms or bounds, and decans or face. So the decan or face is shown over here. Really, it's up here with the dignities. But so this is the domicile or rulership. There aren't any planets in there. Using just the traditional planets, there's nothing in there in its rulership. Here is the exaltation. There are 2 planets in their exaltation. Here are the triplicities. There are 3 planets in their triplicity. And here are the terms, and there are no planets in the terms. There are 2 planets in their decan or face, and then there's 1 in its fall, that's this planet, and there's none that are truly debilitated or in their detriment. So that's what these are showing. And then these, the decans, you might be like, well, I thought the decans were up here. This is decans, I'm doing it in a different way. So the decans up here are saying when a planet is in a specific sign, in a specific degree, it's in its decan or face. Here I'm saying decans are, each sign is divided into 10-degree segments, 10 degrees here. So Aries, we have the first 10 degrees, second 10 degrees, third 10 degrees, and each is ruled by a planet. Mars rules the first 10 degrees of Aries. If we use the Chaldean system, Mars rules the first 10 degrees, Sun rules the second 10 degrees, and Venus rules the third 10 degrees. And here, but what I'm doing is I'm just saying if a planet is in the first 10 degrees, that's the first decan. And so I'm thinking about the decans as a path. First decan, the beginning of the sign, it moves into the middle of the sign, and then the end of the sign. And each of those, I'm saying, have distinct energy. Similar to the quadrants. There's the first sign in the quadrant, that then the process then moves to the second sign, the fixed sign, and the third sign, the mutable sign, the process then moves to the mutable sign. When you think about these, each quadrant as having to do with the seasons, then that makes sense. The season unfolds in this threefold process, we could say. And so I'm sort of saying, well, maybe the decans do that same thing. The first 10 degrees are the beginning of the season or the beginning of whatever process. The second 10 degrees are the middle of that process, and the third 10 degrees are the end of that process. So any planet that's from 0 to 9 degrees, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds, that is what here means the first decan. This is the second, and this is the third. And again, just looking at traditional planets, and interestingly, there are 6 that are falling in the third 10 degrees of their sign. So whatever sign, so here's 17 degrees Jupiter in Gemini, that's the second decan. So that's what actually this one is here. It's in the second decan. Here we have the moon at 23 degrees of Libra. It's the third decan of its sign, so that gets lumped up here. And so you can see in Pisces in particular, there's the Mercury and Saturn and Venus all in the final 10 degrees of their sign. And then we also have Mars in the final 10 degrees of its sign, and the moon and the sun in the final 10 degrees of their sign. So there are 6 planets in the final 10 degrees. So that's what this is. So if anybody was wondering. So anyway, I really just wanted to talk about that and point that out. The fact that 6 planets, there's an overwhelming number of planets in the final decan, suggests that there's more of an ending of a process going than a beginning or a middle of a process going. That's how I would see that. And here we get kind of confirmation of that. We have obviously 3 planets immutable, and the mutable, the planet, they happen to be in Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac. But mutability is also the final part of the seasonal process in each quadrant. So Gemini for spring in the northern hemisphere, Virgo for summer, Sagittarius for fall, and Pisces for winter. So there's a lot going on seasonally, you could say seasonally based on where things are placed in the final sign, the final part of winter, before spring then springs, right? So there's a lot of ending going on in this chart. And I feel like it means there's an opportunity for us to be shedding, especially with this Pisces symbolism, sort of shedding the old veils, you could say, of who we, all the layers of the identities we've taken on. And now there's more and more clarity coming through about who we really are as distinctive from our family. So remember the Sabian symbol of butterfly, with a third wing on its left side. So you could think of that third wing as in 2 ways. The way I was thinking about it initially was this idea of the emphasis on the rational or reasoning brain, but you could also think about it as the thing that's distinctive about us. It's weird that the left brain is associated with the right side and the right brain is associated with the left side. It's confusing to me because when I think of left, I think yin and I think feminine, and to me that would seem more intuitive. But the left brain is thought to be more rational and reasoning. So we could, so maybe that is a both and way of thinking about it. Left on in one way of thinking about it is aligned with that reasoning brain. Have we taken on too much? Have we tried to fit ourselves into who we're supposed to be versus who we really are, that left side, that in the sense of intuitive, and who we really are at a soul and being level. So I hope that made some kind of sense. So anyway, I think that's mostly what I have to say. One other interesting thing about the chart is when we look at the cardinality, there are just 3 planets in cardinal signs, 3 traditional planets. There are 2, and there are none in fixed, but there are 2 planets in fixed signs in this chart, but they're outer planets. There's Pluto and Uranus. So in a sense, that fixed sign is like the anchor. It's fixity. So these outer planets are serving as our anchor in these times, we could say. So we could think of that in a positive way. Pluto being our soul, the choices we make anchor us in whatever reality. We could say they create the reality that we live in, and they anchor us in that reality until we make new choices. I am quickly stepping in here because one more thing I just wanted to say is we are in a time with Pluto and Aquarius. We are in a time, at the beginning of a time, of making new choices and therefore setting in motion a new reality. Those new choices that we make will set in motion or ultimately result in a new reality. So Aquarius, the new, the future, what's unknown. Capricorn, what's known. Pluto, the soul, has left Capricorn, the known, the result of the choices we had made, and now it's in Aquarius, making new choices. And again, that will lead to a new reality. So I just wanted to quickly add that. And then Uranus has been in Taurus for a while. It stays in each sign for about 7 years. It's going to enter into Gemini in July and stay there until November, and then it'll come back into Taurus. Uranus and Taurus is not an easy fit. Uranus is more about, innovation, insight. It feels more quick. It's more like lightning strikes, and it's just quick and it's done, and it shows things, and suddenly you understand something. It's awakening. It's that sort of thing. But in Taurus, it's been needing to exercise patience. It's like, okay, those insights are great, but they're not good enough. They need to be anchored. They need to be rooted. And to the extent that that's happened or is happening, when it moves into Gemini, it will return to Taurus and it will end up in Gemini for good and in April of next year. I think it's the end of April of next year. So what will happen is we'll get a little insight into what that Gemini energy is going to be about, and I imagine it's going to be very fast moving, lots and lots of snap, 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 insight, new things being created. I think that's the kind of energy it's going to be. So we'll get some hint about that, and it'll be Uranus is specific to us, our individuated selves. So maybe we'll get some hints about that with regard to ourselves, who we are, what what our innovations are, all that kind of stuff. And then it'll go back into Taurus. So from November to April, it'll be back in Taurus, and we'll have that clarity that maybe we were lacking to understand what's truly going to be anchored. What is ours to really anchor? Not because somebody tells us to, but because that's what lights us up. That's what inspires us. That's who we are. So that's kind of what I'm seeing in this chart. So I thought what I would do at this stage is just talk a little bit about what's been going on with me and focusing in especially on this design system I'm creating and the Python program I plan to create. But before that, I just want to say that some of the things that have been happening for me have been, so Mercury stationed retrograde and went back and connected up with Saturn and moved forward. And Saturn is the conventional reality, the mores, the norm, or the norms, I guess you could say, of our normative society. And it's in Pisces, so it's like it's releasing all that. And Mercury, you could say, is our perceptions. And one of the things that's been happening for me is it feels like I have been in a battle with the fact that I naturally gravitated to astrology and had a skill in it, and the normative society's perception of it and framing of it as kind of silly, or they sort of see it they don't take it seriously or substantively, and or at least not on the surface. And so I had been sort of in this relationship with that, and suddenly I just realized, they've got it inverted. It's just not the truth at all. What's actually true is that what astrology is it's the encoding of all of these various traditions, spiritual wisdom traditions, encoded in the wheel. So it's gone through all of these societies, and depending on the vantage point you choose to take, it's encoding that spiritual wisdom in it. So the perception that society has about astrology is, as I said, inverted. It's not true at all. It's the exact opposite of what's true. We have this square going on between Saturn and Jupiter, truth and lies, and the trickster, Gemini is ruled by Mercury, the idea of the trickster, Mercury having gone and connected with Saturn, now going forward in its shadow period. So Saturn in Pisces releasing the chains, some of the chains that have been tying us to false perceptions and lies, essentially, falling away. And then Venus is also retrograde right now, and it's conjunct Saturn. It will turn direct 45 minutes about after the full moon, and so it'll go back and conjunct Saturn exactly again, and then continue forward. So what are our worth? What are our values? What are our actual values? Releasing from the values that are no longer true for us, that aren't in alignment with actual truth, capital T truth, and perhaps releasing feelings of old feelings of worthlessness because of these false perceptions. That may be something that's happening, although I can't necessarily speak to that right now. Just that my perceptions definitely change, and actually, yes, I would say that has led to a change in my sense of worth. So anyway, the project that I'm undertaking is creating this design system. And I've been doing this for a while, and the reason it's taking longer than it might have is because I want to build an astrology software program that is able to generate these charts, and eventually I'll need to create like bi-wheels and tri-wheels and all that kind of stuff, and right now the design will allow it to do whole sign houses, but I haven't figured out anything beyond that. I'll need to learn Python before I can figure out beyond that. But I've also been talking to, working with an AI assistant because I don't know Python, to help me better understand how to organize the design so that it will work better when I get to Python and actually start building the program. So that's involved a lot. That's been a really, it's been a big steep learning curve. Like, it's really about distilling things down to their very basic essence, their components, and then building layer after layer on top of that. So it's really been interesting, and I've learned a lot from it. So anyway, the idea of the software program is to create an open source software program that people then, it would be free to use. Anybody who knows how to code or whatever could use a program. They fork it, they call it fork when you create your own version of it, or you take it from one place and you fork it in a different direction or something like that. But also, there's a model out there, that WordPress.org uses, where they provide the WordPress for free, and then they have all these people are able to contribute themes, whether premium or free. And so you can use WordPress.org free. You need a host, and usually that costs money, but WordPress itself is free. And then you can choose from all these different themes. And so if you choose a premium theme, that supports somebody who's running a business where they're building these, creating these premium themes. So part of the idea that I was working on, or sort of had in mind when I was creating this template, and in the templates that I've been using before, same basic template, this one's a little bit more refined in terms of the dimensions and all that kind of stuff. And it's just a different color. Other than that, it's just a different color scheme. And as I said, I happen to like this one the best. But the idea is, how do you create a chart that has the useful information on it in an aesthetically pleasing way? And there are people out there besides me who are doing this, and some people have created really beautiful things. Astrology is a very information dense, especially mathematical information dense discipline. So how do you convey that in a way that's more aesthetically pleasing, rather than just, a list of things that's really hard for your, kind of like a lot of cognitive overload for your brain. And there are people who are creating really beautiful visuals to show this information. So I also had that in mind. And the idea of the program is to create, to write the program in a modular based way, so that the calculations and that sort of stuff are just the engine that runs the whole thing, and then themes can be built on top of that. And the idea is, so WordPress has that business model where people can contribute themes. They can build themes on top of the basic program. And so that's the idea, that people could build themes on top of the program, and they could create the face of the wheel, like the design that works for them, that they really like. And they can do that just for themselves, or they can do it and share it with others for free or for premium. And so it creates a potential for a cottage industry to kind of crop up. So it's not just something that might just work for me, where I create themes and maybe sell those, and hopefully people would be interested, but more people could do that too. So that's the idea of it. And then the next step would be to create courses that actually teach programming, so that you actually learn how to program yourself, and you're learning astrology alongside it. So it's all together. You're learning astrology, and integrated into that is understanding programming within the context of the astrology that we're learning, and also astronomy and math and astrology. So that's the idea. And the reason for that is because we may not need to know how to program. In some ways we might not already need how to do it, because AI can program. And it may be irrelevant. We may just say to AI, could you create this for us? And they create it for us. But my feeling is that it's good to know how to actually do it. Just like we don't need to calculate charts by hand anymore, I think we miss a lot by not knowing how to do it and not doing it for a while. I think it's better to know how to do it and better to spend time doing it, because you get an insight into astrology that you don't otherwise. But also, what happens if there's a computer outage, right? You're stuck. There's nothing you can do. So, and then in terms of, and so I think the same thing applies to learning how to program. I'm an older generation. I didn't learn, I don't just naturally know how to program. I didn't grow up with it. So it's something I have to actually learn. And so understanding that, it might help us better work with AI, to create what we want, but also we could create it for ourselves if we wanted to. And we could, more importantly, we could understand. So if there's this open source program out there and you can adapt it however you like, well, you can only do that if you understand programming. If you don't understand programming, you can use what's there, assuming you have the hardware that lets you, or the software or whatever that lets you use it. In my case, I have a Chromebook, so I can't use most of the open source software that's out there, astrology software that's out there. Anyway, it's a little bit complex, but so you would be able to you would understand what it actually was and how to use it and how to implement it. So that's the idea. That's sort of the short-term goal. The goal that I'm actually working on is the design system. The midterm goal is learning Python and building the astrology program. And the longer-term goal is creating courses that integrates all of this into one thing, so people come away knowing how to create for themselves, program, and also maybe design, and also learning astrology. So they come out, they have their own, they have their own program that they can continue with, or they better understand how to use other programs, etc. And then there's that cottage industry idea. And then long term for me is I'd really just like to learn traditional astrology and just hunker down and really learn it. I think it's not just about, we often think of traditional astrology as being about good or bad, and modern astrology has advanced that to understanding there's more nuance. But when you listen to traditional astrologers, it's very clear that traditional astrology, the ancients who created and crafted this system and carried it forward, were thinking very deeply and in a very nuanced way about a lot of things. So I'd really like to learn that. I feel like I'm missing that anchor. So that speaks to this idea of anchor that I was talking about with Uranus and Taurus. It does feel like I'm missing anchor piece for me that I'd really like to learn. So that's kind of my path, and that feels like it's consistent with me, with who I am. And what I feel like I want to contribute and perhaps have to contribute, even if I have to learn some things along the way to be able to do it. So this isn't far enough along for me to really create anything where people could contribute, for anybody who is wanting to, specific to this project. But you could always support me by sharing Astrology Journal, subscribing to Astrology Journal, either at the free or paid level. I completely understand if you don't have money. I can't pay for subscriptions right now, so I totally get it. So I wouldn't want anybody who couldn't afford to subscribe to support me. But if you have disposable income and this project feels, is something that you would want to put your money behind or support, you could subscribe at a paid level to Astrology Journal. You would get Astrology Journal. And most of Astrology Journal is free. Occasionally I have some paid specific content, but that's what you would get, and that would help me in terms of being able to fulfill this sort of passion project of mine that I hope becomes a primary project at some point. So anyway, so that's where I'm at. That's what's going on for me in these energies and these times. And I think it offers some insight into kind of what's unfolding. My personal unfolding, I hopefully gives context or gives insight into the energies as a whole as they're unfolding for all of us. And they're going to unfold for all of us in the ways that are unique for us. But when we each share our personal journeys, I think we get insight into the different energies that are at play. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I hope there was something helpful. I always like to end with, the sort of the take what works and leave the rest kind of ending. But really what I mean by that is if it's helpful, if it's useful, if it's insightful, if it helps you better understand what you're going through and why in a way that's uplifting, in a way that is grounding, take that and leave all the rest. That's what I mean. And if none of that, if there isn't any of that to take from what I've given, then leave it completely and find the people who are able to inspire you, able to help, through their perspective that they share, able to help you ground, that perspective, able to help you ground, etc. So that's what I mean when I say take what works and leave the rest. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful for you. Take care. Bye.